At the Patriots' Corner Diner, a cup of coffee spilled, a photograph blurred, and a hand struck an old man's face. What no one knew, as silence fell across the room, was that the frail black veteran standing there was not just any man. He was the father of the FBI director. And that single slap would tear open the soul of Harmony Creek. Arthur Washington sat alone in the corner booth of the Patriots' Corner. In front of him was a cup of black coffee and an old, faded photograph. That picture never left his wallet, but this morning he had taken it out, placed it carefully on the table, and let his finger trace the face of the woman in the photo. Sarah, his late wife, captured on their wedding day. Her gentle smile was the one thing that still kept him from feeling completely abandoned in this world. Arthur wasn't counting change. He wasn't reading the paper. He simply sat there, silent, like an old soldier holding on to the last memory that mattered. Then a shadow fell across the table. Kyle Miller, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, leather shoes polished to a shine. Instead of stepping aside as he passed, he leaned in and rammed his shoulder deliberately against the edge of Arthur's table. The jolt was enough to tip the cup. Coffee spilled in a dark wave across the wood. Spreading fast and swallowing Sarah's photograph beneath it, Arthur froze. His hand darted to the photo, trying to blot it dry, but it was too late. The ink had already bled, Sarah's radiant smile fading into a gray smear, her face dissolving into nothing. Kyle smirked, his voice sharp and cruel. "Oh, sorry, old man. Just a piece of paper. I'm sure you've got plenty more like it." He didn't look at Arthur. He looked at the ruined photo, lips curling with a satisfaction too deliberate to hide. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. Kyle thought he had destroyed an old man's memory. What he didn't know was that he had just lit the fuse to a storm. Harmony Creek was not a large town. Drive a few minutes in any direction and you're out of it. Yet its short streets, its small storefronts, and the old trees that lined the main avenue carried more layers of time than any map could capture. People often called it the crossroads of two worlds. On one side, families who had lived there for generations, holding on to their land, their habits, their memories. On the other, new neighborhoods rising fast, their billboards flashing promises of luxury apartments, just 30 minutes from downtown. That billboard stood tilted at the entrance of town, like a bitter reminder that Harmony Creek was being pulled in a different direction. The Patriots' Corner Diner had become a strange battlefield because of it. Here, you could see an old farmer with weathered hands sipping coffee right next to a businessman in a shining suit. But those two worlds rarely spoke to each other. They only coexisted, sharing the smell of bacon grease and the clink of forks against plates. On that morning, the air was so heavy that a single misplaced glance might have sparked an explosion. Arthur Washington walked in. He always entered the same way, upright, steady. To most, he looked like a 75-year-old black man in a worn brown coat. But Chloe Sanchez, the young waitress with observant eyes, saw more. On his lapel, she noticed a small silver pin dulled by time. Most people ignored it, but her father had once told her what it meant. The insignia of the Green Berets, the Army's Special Forces. A man who wore it was not just a veteran. He was someone who had survived and come back from places no ordinary person ever wanted to set foot in. "Good morning, Mr. Washington," Chloe said with a small smile, setting a menu in front of him out of habit. Arthur gave a slight nod, his gaze kind but far away. He never looked at the menu. "A black coffee, Chloe. Thank you." She knew it was always his choice, like a ritual. Then he would sit in silence, take out the photo of his wife, look at it for a while, and leave for the town library, where he read to children who gathered around him like he was the grandfather they'd never had. Once, Chloe had dared to ask, "Why Tuesdays, Mr. Washington?" He had chuckled, eyes creasing with old lines. Tuesday is the day least hated, not the start of the week, not the end. A neutral day, half a joke, half a truth. But Chloe had felt something else hidden in that answer, a way of speaking around memories he didn't want to touch. Kyle Miller sat at the largest table, right in the center of the diner. He needed no introduction. Everyone in town knew him, the real estate developer who had bought up half the land around Harmony Creek in just 2 years. The tailored gray suit, the polished Italian shoes, the gold watch flashing on his wrist, all of it declared that he belonged to another world. "We need to clear out that old district," Kyle said loudly into his phone, making sure the whole diner could hear. "Those rundown houses drag Harmony Creek into the mud. I want shopping centers, luxury condos. This place needs to be elevated." A few people lowered their eyes. Others stared out the window, pretending not to hear. Everyone knew Kyle had ties to Sheriff Johnson. To cross him was to invite trouble. Arthur didn't turn, but he heard every word. He lifted his cup, took a sip, and let the bitterness spread across his tongue. No bitterness now could compare to what had long settled deep in his memory. Chloe, passing by, couldn't hold her tongue. "This town doesn't belong to you, Mr. Miller." Kyle looked up with a smirk, but instead of snapping back at her, his eyes slid over to Arthur, like he had just spotted a more interesting target. "Not everyone belongs here," he declared loudly, his voice carrying across the room. "Some old habits need to die. Harmony Creek needs a new face, not the ghosts of the past." Arthur said nothing. He opened his wallet and drew out Sarah's photo. Her face, gentle, radiant, appeared under the dim diner light. He placed it carefully on the table, gazing at it like a ritual too deep to break. At that moment, his phone buzzed. A message? He opened it, and a smile flickered at the edge of his lips. Just a few words. "Dad, the meeting with POTUS went well. I'll call later." Signed only with the letter M. Arthur typed back. "Proud of you." Chloe caught a glimpse, and her eyes widened. She didn't dare ask, but a thought flashed. Who could text about meeting the President of the United States unless they were already close to the most powerful circles in the country? And Arthur's hands, those old hands, didn't tremble when he typed. Each keystroke was firm, steady, like the hands of a man who had never stopped being vigilant. Kyle rose. He slipped his phone into his pocket and strode toward the counter. Each step sounded louder than it should, as if he wanted the whole diner to feel it. "Hey, Chloe," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "This place is really going downhill. Letting just anyone walk in. Even people who don't belong here." Chloe stiffened, but her voice stayed polite. "Mr. Washington is a regular customer, Mr. Miller." Kyle smirked. "A regular, huh? Old habits need breaking. This town needs progress. And trust me, these old memories will vanish soon enough." The words hung heavy in the air. No one laughed. No one replied. People just stared down at their plates, avoiding each other's eyes. Arthur slowly lifted his gaze. No anger, no sudden outburst. Just a look. Deep, dark, like the bottom of a well with no end. Chloe shivered. In that gaze, she understood. Kyle Miller had just touched something far beyond his grasp. Kyle gripped his briefcase strap, the corner of his mouth curling higher, his eyes sharpening like a blade. He changed direction, walking slowly toward Arthur's corner booth. As he passed, his shoulder tilted, his elbow knocking the edge of the table. A motion that seemed casual, but was executed with merciless precision. And the coffee quivered. To Kyle Miller, Arthur Washington was not just a 75-year-old black man drinking coffee in a corner booth. He was the living emblem of a past Kyle wanted to erase. Honor, memory, and a silent strength money could never buy. And that was why this was not simply a clash between a bully and an old soldier. This was a battle for the very soul of Harmony Creek, where past, present, and future were being pulled taut in opposite directions. If you believe courage has no age and humility is the truest strength, hit like and subscribe right now, because Kyle Miller is about to make a fatal mistake. One that will bring the full weight of the federal government crashing down on this little diner. The napkin in Arthur's hand was soaked, but it was useless. The dark coffee had spread across the photo, and Sarah's radiant smile, the last light he carried each day, dissolved into a meaningless blur. He set the photo down, still clutching the damp paper as if he could hold on to a memory being stripped away right before his eyes. In that moment, Arthur heard nothing, not the clatter of silverware, not the whispers around him, only Sarah's voice in his memory, soft as a summer breeze. "You promised you'd protect us, didn't you?" That question had carried him through battles, through sleepless nights under foreign skies, yet now, a single cold shove had blurred it all, like someone was trying to erase the last soul he had left. You shouldn't have done that," Arthur rasped, his voice hoarse but carrying through the silence. Kyle stood there, smirking, as if he'd just pulled off a clever prank. "So what if I did, old man? What are you gonna do, Cry?" He stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne thick in the air, his shadow swallowing Arthur's table whole. Arthur rose slowly. He wasn't tall, he wasn't strong, and he was certainly no match for the younger man's size. But the way he stood, straight, unflinching, eyes steady, made Kyle instinctively step back half a pace. "I'm asking you to apologize," Arthur said. His tone was calm, not pleading. It carried the weight of command. "Apologize?" Kyle barked a laugh that filled the diner, sharp and cruel. "Who do you think you are to demand that of me? You're nothing but a useless old black man clinging to a ruined photo." The room froze. A man at a nearby table lifted his hand as if to intervene, then lowered it, staring away. A young mother held her child closer, eyes cast down. No one dared step in. Arthur bent, picked up the photo, slipped it into his wallet, and turned to leave. But Kyle blocked him. "Don't move!" His massive hand slammed into Arthur's chest. Arthur staggered, his back striking the table edge, dishes crashing to the floor in a sharp explosion of porcelain. Chloe cried out, her tray clattering to the tiles. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice trembling but firm. "Shut up!" Kyle snapped, his eyes blazing as he loomed over Arthur. A wicked grin stretched across his face. And then his hand lashed out. Fast. Hard. Without restraint. The sound cracked through the air like a whip, a slap that seemed to echo in every corner of the diner. The room fell into stunned silence. Chloe froze, her eyes wide with horror. Arthur wavered but did not fall. His hand touched his cheek, but he stood rooted, like an old tree weathering the storm, its leaves trembling but its trunk unbroken. The overhead light caught on the small silver pin at his lapel, the green beret insignia, proof of the years he had once been a soldier, a man who had walked through jungles and deserts with death always a step away. Arthur lifted his head. His eyes were different now, no longer the gentle gaze of an old man sipping coffee, but the hard, unyielding eyes of someone who had stared at enemies, buried comrades, and stood between life and death without flinching. Kyle faltered. For a split second, he wasn't facing a frail senior. He was facing a warrior. "You just made a very, very big mistake," Arthur said, his voice low and cold, each word striking like iron on stone. The tension was unbearable. Chloe felt her heartbeat race, sweat dampening her brow. Kyle laughed again, but the sound was strained, defensive. "Oh, I'm terrified." "What are you gonna do, huh? Call someone? Get your broke little friends to back you up?" Arthur didn't answer. He calmly pulled a phone from his coat, his fingers moving with deliberate certainty. He placed it on the table, pressed the speaker, and let it ring. Once. Twice. Then a voice cut through, deep and sharp. The voice of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions. "Dad? What's going on? I'm in the middle of a national security briefing with the president. I can't stay long." The diner froze. Chloe's jaw dropped, her tray slipping from her hands. Several customers covered their mouths in shock. They had heard this voice before, on TV, in press conferences about terrorism, about national threats. There was no mistaking it. It was Marcus Washington, director of the FBI. Arthur never broke eye contact with Kyle. His voice was calm, almost cold. "Marcus, that meeting will have to wait." Kyle's face drained of color. He stumbled back, body stiff as stone, sweat pouring from his temples. In that instant, everything he thought he controlled, money, power, connections, collapsed around him. The man he had just mocked and struck was the father of the most powerful lawman in the nation. Harmony Creek held its breath, and everyone in that diner knew the real storm was only just beginning. Marcus's voice thundered through the speaker, sharp and commanding. "Dad, are you hurt? GPS shows you at Harmony Creek. I can have a rapid response team there in 10 minutes. The diner froze. A few people gripped their chairs as if the whole building might collapse. Chloe clutched her tray, chest rising and falling fast. Some of the older customers whispered in disbelief, "That's Marcus Washington, the FBI director." Kyle stammered, lips trembling. "Our rapid response team." He stumbled back, his foot striking the table leg, nearly sending him to the floor. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Arthur's eyes never wavered. His voice was steady as steel. "No need, son. I'm fine. But there's a man here named Kyle Miller. He just taught me a lesson about knowing my place." The name Kyle dropped into the thick silence like a stone, making hearts pound faster. Chloe clutched her apron, her eyes blazing. She had never seen Arthur call out a man of power without a flicker of fear. Marcus paused for a beat before his voice rumbled again, lower, colder. "Dad, don't let them touch you. If they do, I'll make sure this entire state knows his name." Arthur gave the smallest nod and ended the call. He remained calm, but everyone in the diner knew. The weight of the federal government had just entered that little room. Kyle swallowed hard, scrambling to rebuild his mask. He let out a rough, forced laugh, voice cracking. "You people actually buy this act? Some ragged old man dialing up the FBI director from a diner? Please, it's a scam. He hired a voice actor. Wake up!" Right then, the door swung open. Sheriff Johnson waddled in, heavy-set, his badge gleaming, hat tipped low. Adjusting his belt as he scanned the room, he barely hid his disdain. Kyle pounced, grabbing at him like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "Johnson!" "Thank God. This old man's causing trouble, pretending to call the FBI director. Arrest him now!" The sheriff narrowed his eyes at Arthur, as if he'd already made up his mind. "That's so, disturbing the peace, huh?" His voice dragged with mock authority. "All right then, old man, on your feet. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and attempted fraud." Arthur didn't move. He sat still, one hand resting on the wallet where Sarah's photo lay inside, his face calm beyond reason. The sheriff's hand dropped to his gun, his tone sharp and hard. "Don't make me repeat myself. Stand up, now!" The diner went rigid. Some customers turned away, unwilling to get involved. Chloe trembled, but her eyes lit with defiance. Kyle crossed his arms, smirking. "See? This is Harmony Creek. This is how it really works." Just as Johnson reached for Arthur's shoulder, a voice cracked through the tension. "Stop!" Chloe stood in front of the table, holding up her phone. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned. "I recorded everything. The slap, the racist words, Miller's little show. If you touch Mr. Washington, I'll send this straight to the FBI." Kyle's eyes widened. He snarled, "You wouldn't dare!" "I would!" Chloe shot back. Firm. A second voice came from the doorway. "So would I." A young journalism student stepped inside, holding up a small camcorder, the red light blinking. "I've been documenting the town for my project. I caught it all, video, audio, clear as day. Deny it if you can." The air shifted. Johnson froze, sweat breaking across his brow. And then an older voice rose from the corner. "I've got footage, too." A grizzled veteran pushed up from his seat, tapping the small body camera clipped to his cap. "I keep it rolling whenever I'm out. Old habits. Especially for punks who think they run the place. Want to try denying it now, Sheriff?" Gasps rippled through the diner. 3 witnesses, 3 recordings. A young waitress, trembling but unyielding, a student with ideals, a soldier with honor. They stood together like an unshakable wall against corrupt power. The silence grew heavier than shouting. This wasn't a battle of guns. It was a battle of will. Johnson's jaw clenched, his hand trembling on his weapon. His eyes darted from the cameras pointed at him to Arthur's steady, calm gaze. Every escape route closed in, not by the law, but by the very people he was sworn to protect. Kyle, frantic, lashed out in desperation. He jabbed a finger at Chloe, spitting venom. "You think you're someone? You're just a waitress. I'll call your boss right now. Get you fired before that video ever sees daylight." It was a cruel, naked threat. But Chloe, who had already faced down her fear, didn't flinch. Her grip on the phone was steady now. "Go ahead," she said softly, voice like iron. "Some things matter more than a job." The words landed like a slap of their own, snuffing out Kyle's last flame of arrogance. He faltered, silent. The diner held its breath. They had just witnessed real courage. And in that moment of moral victory, bang! Engines roared outside, tires screeching against asphalt. 2 unmarked black SUVs skidded to a halt in front of the diner. Doors flung open. 4 men in dark suits with earpieces entered in formation, their presence heavy with unspoken authority. Sheriff Johnson puffed out his chest, desperate to salvage his crumbling power. "This is a police scene. Who the hell are you? Get out, now!" But the men didn't even glance at him. They passed him as though he were invisible, their eyes fixed only on Arthur Washington. Johnson froze. In 20 years as sheriff, no one had ever treated him like he didn't exist. A cold shiver raced down his spine. He glanced at Kyle, but saw only a pale face streaked with sweat. The lead agent stopped before Arthur, bowed slightly. "Mr. Washington, the director sent us. Your safety is our top priority. Please, come with us." The words director and Washington struck like hammers. The truth clicked into place. The commanding voice on the phone, Arthur's calm, and now this team. Johnson's hand slipped from his gun, falling limp at his side. His jaw clenched, then slackened. He stumbled back a step, then another, retreating from the shadow of the disaster he'd nearly caused. His eyes no longer held contempt, only fear, the look of a man facing judgment. Kyle was unraveling. He searched the room for an ally, but every gaze burned with contempt. The fake respect was gone, replaced by disgust. His knees buckled. "Please, Mr. Washington, sir, it was just a misunderstanding. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." Arthur rose slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His eyes cut through, and his words landed like a verdict. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is you treated me this way because you thought I was nobody. Do you understand the difference?" The words slammed shut like a coffin lid. Kyle collapsed. The diner was silent except for the pounding of hearts. One agent stepped forward, snapping cuffs onto Kyle without a word. Then he turned to Johnson, his tone sharp as a blade. "Sheriff, we'll have a few questions for you. Don't go anywhere." The sentence hung in the air like a suspended noose. Johnson stood rigid, not daring to protest. In that instant, he knew. He was no longer the law in Harmony Creek. He was now the accused. The diner slowly regained its murmur of voices, but no one dared to rise from their seats. Not out of fear. Rather, because everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment that would live forever in the history of Harmony Creek. Kyle was dragged out, his knees buckling, eyes vacant. The clink of handcuffs didn't just close around his wrists. It locked away years of arrogance, bullying, and manipulation that had poisoned the town. Those who once bowed their heads before him now watched with contempt, not fear. Arthur still sat there, one hand resting lightly on the old wallet. Inside was Sarah's photo, blurred and stained. His fingers brushed across the cracked leather, as if soothing a wound just stitched shut. The truth had been laid bare, but in his eyes, the pain lingered, the pain of watching people so willing to degrade each other over a seat, a cup of coffee, a show of power. At the door, federal agents held Sheriff Johnson in place. One of them spoke, his voice low and cold. "Sheriff Johnson, you're being taken in for questioning. You're under suspicion of obstruction of justice and abuse of power." Johnson opened his mouth, but his throat was dry. For years, he had been the only man in Harmony Creek who gave orders. Now he was the one being ordered. The badge on his chest was no longer a shield, but evidence of betrayal. His hand shook as he reached for it, only to feel the agent strip it away. The sharp snap of metal echoed like the final cut to his 20-year career. Inside the diner, the older patrons gave small nods. One whispered, "This town finally has hope." Chloe lowered her phone. Her arm ached, but her eyes glowed. For the first time, she didn't feel small. The young journalism student's hands trembled as he clutched his camera. Not from fear, but from excitement. He knew this footage would change a community's fate. The old veteran sat quietly, yet his eyes shone with pride. He had just watched a new generation stand up, not with weapons, but with truth. By the next day, the story spread across Harmony Creek. The local paper blared the headline, "Self-styled tycoon and sheriff taken by FBI in town diner standoff." Chloe's video was shared millions of times, not only across the state, but across the country. People debated, raged, and finally agreed. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it begins with a trembling phone in the hands of a waitress. Kyle was transferred to Washington for further investigation. He faced not only assault charges, but a mountain of evidence on corruption, bribery, and money laundering, uncovered from that single night. Johnson was immediately suspended. The sheriff's office sealed, his career destroyed in a week. Within days, he faced 3 formal charges: obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and corruption. Those who once shook his hand turned their backs, leaving him to fall alone. And Harmony Creek. People began to walk with their heads higher. The diner, once the site of Kyle's cruelty, became a symbol. Locals whispered a new name for it: the Diner of Truth. Arthur kept coming each morning, sitting at his familiar table, sipping black coffee, Sarah's picture always in his wallet. When asked if he felt vindicated, he would only shake his head softly. "No one wins in things like this. Only the truth comes out, and we have to live decent enough lives to keep it here." His words spread through town like a new proverb. Harmony Creek began to change. A younger, more honorable sheriff was appointed. The old homes in the historic district were saved, no longer threatened by development. People began speaking of collective memory as something worth protecting. Kyle and Johnson were gone, but the legacy of truth remained. And in every retelling, people remembered that morning in the diner, when a 75-year-old black man, his hand resting on an old wallet, taught an entire town that justice doesn't need to shout. It can come through calm, through resolve, and through the courage of ordinary people. Weeks later, Arthur took Sarah's damaged photo to a restoration shop. The old craftsman looked at it and said, "I can't bring all of it back, but I can make her smile clearer." Arthur smiled. The past could never be fully restored, but love could still be mended, still shine again. He slipped the photo back into his wallet and walked out into the street, his heart lighter, as if Sarah was still smiling right beside him. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with noise. It comes with a calm gaze, a steady word, and the courage of ordinary people. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story so you won't miss the next journey of truth and justice.